Hi there, this is Frank Brill, editor of Enviropolitics. Today we have the first of a two-part podcast involving contamination at military bases in Pennsylvania and New Jersey that now poses a potential threat to residents near the bases and possibly to servicemen, contractors, and others who had served on the bases at certain periods in the past. With us today are two members of an investigative team assembled by the Bucks County Courier Times and the Burlington County Times, two daily newspapers owned by Calkins Media. They and their colleagues have been researching the issue for months and have produced a number of stories already which raise alarms for folks near the bases. In today's episode, we're going to focus on the Pennsylvania story, since that was the first to be discovered, and we'll switch to New Jersey in the second episode. I'd like you to know that there also will be a video version of this interview, which will be available in the next day or two on our Enviropolitics YouTube channel. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and that you'll pass it on to your friends and associates, and especially anyone you know who may have served at any point on these military bases. Okay, with that, let's get to it.
There, can you tell me who you are?
Kyle Bagenstos, environmental reporter with the Bucks County Courier Times.
I'm Christina Nasuti. I'm the investigative reporter for Burlington County Times.
And those two papers are linked together. You're both under the same ownership, right?
Yes.
Okay, very good. I'm Frank Brill, editor of Enviropolitics, and we are here to interview put you on the other side of the fence for a change, interviewing you because of a story, or a series of stories actually, that you've been writing. Your paper has been covering, both papers, that have to do with contamination that's in the groundwater under the joint bases, Fort Dix, McGuire, and Lakehurst, and that has been leaking or traveling off the site, and we're going to get to that. Before we do, I'd just like to ask you both first a little bit of background. People are always interested in this. We'll start with Kyle on the left. Kyle, how long have you been in journalism? Where have you worked?
Well, I graduated Temple's journalism school in the spring of 2010, and more or less have been working in the industry for various publications since then. Patch.com, a magazine company, for a brief time. And I've been with Calkins Media, which owns the papers here, for about 3 years now, first as a daily reporter and now as the environmental reporter.
And what's your assignment here?
Christina and I have been kind of working together on this story. The joint base, we were originally investigating some military bases on this side of the river in Warminster and Horsham, Bucks, Montgomery counties. And that story initially ran in February of 2016, so last February, and quickly became aware of the fact that there might be also an issue with Joint Base McGuire Dix Lakehurst. So Christina kind of took the lead on investigating there, but we've been together looking at that over the past year or so.
And Christina, your assignment, you're primarily with the Burlington.
Yeah, I'm primarily with Burlington County Times, but Kyle and I are part of the same investigative team. We're one of 6 or 7 on the team. I should know this off the top of my head, but I think it's 7. So there are 7 of us. Kyle is environmental, but I cover Burlington County, so anything and everything. But with this assignment, I mean, as Kyle had mentioned, this is something that has been on the radar since the Warminster reports. But 2016, May of 2016 was the very first story that we wrote about the Joint Base McGuire. And at that point, they've been well into their preliminary investigation at the Joint Base. So,
okay, great. Well, kudos to your newspaper for still putting resources into investigative reporting and environmental reporting. There are fewer of environmental reporters around these days. It's great to see, and there's more need, from my point of view, to have environmental reporting. But at any rate, so let's get to the story at hand here. Now, what links the bases in Pennsylvania and New Jersey is the material that has leaked into the groundwater. Tell us a little about that material and why it was used on the bases in the first place.
Oh, I take that one?
Yeah, you can, yeah.
Aqueous film-forming foam, AFFF, as it's commonly referred to. That's a solution that military has been using going back probably 3 or 4 decades to put out oil fires, any carbon-based material fire for it. Water doesn't really do the job. It sinks to the bottom of water and actually becomes more volatile as it expands, as it starts to boil. So these foams used a product called PFOA, PFOS, originally developed by private industry, companies like 3M and DuPont, and basically put this into the solution. I don't want to get into too much of the science behind it, I don't think, but it blanketed the foam, the fires, and put them out. So the military has used these foams across hundreds of bases over the past 30 or 40 years. More often than not, they were used in training, not necessarily for emergency situations, but just regular daily use of the base. Firefighters would go out, practice using this foam, and more often than not, it seems in a lot of cases, it would be left to either go into the base's stormwater management system, which would then discharge into the environment, or sometimes just left onto the soil or the environment to make its way, through into the groundwater, infiltrating, run off into streams, whatever nature does with it. So
now, for people who are not familiar with the science and the chemistry, this material was also used. It was very popular in using at home in cookery and in nonstick frying pans and things like that. So, and it's only been in recent years, I guess, that there's been a general awareness that it's dangerous. Certainly in the case like this, where it gets into the environment, into the groundwater. So I just wanted to be clear that the Army didn't necessarily know at the time they were using it that there was going to be a problem, or did they?
No, I think that has not been demonstrated that they had any knowledge of the dangers, the toxicity of this material. As I said, they've been used for decades, as you said, for many private applications, things like Teflon pans, stain-resistant clothing.
Sticky notes, the back of the sticky notes also contain the chemical as well, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all kinds of applications. There have been some lawsuits against private industry that these companies had some prior knowledge going back into the 90s, 80s, that they were at least some level of concern about this. There has not really been any information, with very few exceptions, that the military shared those concerns. I think a lot of concerns came about post-2000, when a lot of research, released public research, started coming out about these chemicals and their potential toxicity.
So when did the Army or the military start to react or take any action on this?
Well, I'll talk about what I know generally, sure. And then Christina can mention the joint base maybe. But I think looking at Warminster and Horsham as being two early examples, I think the military started to investigate there, or at least in some way, about 2011. That's the earliest kind of reference I can find to PFOA or PFOS being a concern there. Primarily looking at that base, I haven't looked at the literature from around the country too much, but I think it's about that. I would say, towards the 2008, 9, 10, 11, it started to hit the radar for the military, and they started, as I said, thinking about this, best I can tell, for this region around 2011. You want to talk about joint base?
Yeah, I believe for joint base, the investigation began around 2014, 2015. That's what the records have shown, the initial preliminary assessment. But I mean, just to kind of jump into the national look, and the military has been working to phase out the use of this foam, and they are actually limiting the amounts that they use for practices only. But they're trying to phase out the foam as we speak. I believe they spent about $16 million to try to replace the foam. But I mean, looking at joint base, their investigation began 2014-15. And since then, they have been going through their process. So they have each military base has a process that they follow. Right now, I believe we're still in the site investigation phase, and they have about six or seven more phases to go before this investigation is officially complete for them. Whether or not they're going to continue to monitor after the investigation is closed, that's something that we're going to have to determine and speak with them on.
I guess it depends on what they find.
Yeah, it does depend on what they find.
So is Warminster out ahead in terms of investigation?
Yeah, I would say so. I believe, they're basically a little further down the line. And what happened of interest in Horsham and Warminster is that in 2000, I want to say it was 13 was the original list, but then over the next couple of years, they implemented what's called a unregulated contaminant monitoring rule testing program. It's a lot of words, but basically what it does is there's a lot of unregulated chemicals that are out there. Every 5 years or so, the EPA will pick a list of a couple dozen that it uses the most potentially dangerous, and it will start a sampling program around the country to test for these chemicals. PFOA and PFOS, these chemicals in firefighting foam, made the list for the round that took place in basically 2014 and 15, and that identified high levels of contamination in the public water supplies near the bases here. So that kind of, obviously, the alarm bells rang that they need to deal with the situation. And I think the military just at that time, after spending about 2 or 3 years starting to do some of the environmental sampling, was just getting around to thinking maybe we should sample these public water supplies nearby. So they said that process took about 3 years between when they first started looking and when the UCMR program, the EPA's program, rang those alarm bells. So and that was going back 2 years, but they're still looking at environmental media as well.
So why don't I ask each of you individually, what are the potential impact areas for Warminster and for the joint bases? And by the way, when we say joint bases, I think I said initially, but people may not be familiar with that term. That's an all-encompassing term that takes in Fort Dix and McGuire Air Force Base
and Lakehurst. Yeah.
Okay, in New Jersey. They're all in Burlington County, and they pretty much abut each other.
It's Burlington and Ocean County. The largest portion of the base, McGuire and Dix, are in Burlington County.
All right. Well, since Pennsylvania had the lead here,
right. So yeah, the impact areas have been pretty well defined. We're still waiting to see. A lot of times, the military put together a plume map, a very colorful demonstration, easy to follow. This is where we know groundwater has been contaminated. I haven't seen that yet, but we know that in the 3 townships, Warminster, Warrington, and Horsham, they serve about 70,000 people with public water. Pretty much all those people were exposed in their water systems to varying degrees. So that's kind of the footprint, if you will, of the really high levels of contamination, water above the EPA's recommended health advisory. Surrounding townships, places like Hatboro, Northampton, to some extent Warwick, you've seen maybe some private well owners have it, and maybe a few public wells that are contaminated with levels below the EPA 70 part per trillion health advisory. But that's more or less the footprint. I would have to look at the map to know for sure, but it's a matter of miles, a mile or two from contaminated sites at the base to where the farthest contaminated wells have been found contaminated at the sense of above the EPA's health limit.
Well, that's quite an impact, potential impact anyway.
Well,
especially near the bases, it's amazing.
Yes, I mean there's not a lot of data to show. One of the things people in Pennsylvania are pushing for is a blood testing program to determine the extent of which they've been impacted. But I haven't seen anybody question the fact that at least in the neighborhood of 70,000 current residents had this in their drinking water at levels the EPA has now shut down those wells. So I think that's a definite. The question of the impact in terms of how high exactly were those levels when they were drinking it, how many people in the past, and what are the health repercussions of that, that's still up in the air.
And that 70,000 area, that was public systems? They were coming off what they called, city water, or were they, or were a lot of
those were public systems. The public systems, Warminster, Warrington, and Horsham, used groundwater wells for their water.
Oh, I see.
So they each had between, I think it was about 10 to 15 water wells each that would supply millions of gallons, I think, on a monthly basis. And the wells that were found to be contaminated above the 70 part per trillion limit have all been taken offline. So they've been taking other measures to pipe water in from neighboring companies, install filtration systems that can filter it, that sort of thing. But yeah, when the contamination was first found, they were groundwater wells that took water out of the aquifer, which these chemicals had polluted from the bases, and that's been what the kind of water they've been drinking for decades since foam use began in the 70s.
Okay, that's where we're going to have to stop for today. But as I said earlier, in our next episode, we'll focus on the joint bases in New Jersey. If environmental issues like this, plus news, legislation, and regulations in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, and Delaware are important to you, check out our daily newsletter, Enviropolitics. That's one word, Enviropolitics, with a capital E and a capital P. You can receive the newsletter free for 30 days. You'll find us at enviropolitics.com. Also check out our Enviropolitics blog, just Google it, and our Enviro events calendar. Until next time, thanks for listening and for reading.